That fateful morning in 1775. The weight of a continent. As the sun climbed over the horizon of a fractured colonies, a tall, stoic Virginian stepped into the halls of the Continental Congress. The air was thick with the scent of rebellion and the looming shadow of the British gallows. On this morning, George Washington was appointed Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army. A ragtag assembly of farmers and merchants pitted against the professional might of the British Empire. He didn't just accept a commission, he accepted the burden of an unborn nation's soul. The long cold winter of 1775 to 1783. A general forged in fire, through the biting frosts of Valley Forge and the daring midnight crossing of the icy Delaware, Washington became the heartbeat of the Revolution. He was the man who refused to break when the world expected him to shatter. The strategic masterstroke. Leading a weary, underfunded army, he outmaneuvered the global superpower of the age. By the time the British surrendered at Yorktown, Washington had transformed a collection of colonies into a unified force of independence. He didn't just win battles, he won the future. The quiet dawn of 1789, from sword to scepterless leader. History is full of conquerors who seized power, but Washington's greatest act was his restraint. After the smoke of the Revolution cleared, he returned his sword to Congress and went home, only to be summoned back by the unanimous voice of a new people. He was inaugurated as the first president of the United States, setting the precedent for every leader to follow. The legacy of a titan. He refused the title of king, choosing instead the humble dignity of Mr. President. He established the cabinet, the financial systems, and the very stability of the American experiment. The eternal sunset, the father of his country. George Washington remains the founding father in the truest sense. He was the indispensable man, the general who won the war, the statesman who secured the peace, and the patriot who taught a nation how to walk on its own 2 feet. His story is the foundation upon which the entire American character is built. Would you like me to expand on a specific battle, such as the crossing of the Delaware, or perhaps move forward to the next giant of history, Thomas Jefferson? The stormy morning of 1861. The rise of an unlikely hero. When the first shells shrieked over Fort Sumter, Ulysses S. Grant was a humble clerk in a leather goods store, a man whom many thought had seen his best days pass him by. But as the nation tore itself asunder, the West began to whisper his name. While other generals hesitated, haunted by the shadow of the Confederate myth, Grant moved with a singular, grim purpose. He didn't just want to win a battle. He intended to preserve the Union at any cost. The bloody noon of 1864, the clash of titans. By the time the war reached its fever pitch, President Abraham Lincoln had found his quiet man. As the General-in-Chief of all Union armies, Grant embarked on the Overland Campaign, a relentless, grinding march through the wilderness of Virginia. The final confrontation. The world watched as Grant faced off against the legendary Robert E. Lee. It was a collision of 2 eras. Grant understood the brutal mathematics of modern warfare, pushing forward when others would have retreated. At Appomattox Courthouse in April 1865, he didn't demand humiliation. He offered honorable terms, proving that a great captain could also be a man of peace. The high noon of 1869, healing a broken land. The The smoke of the battlefields had barely cleared when the nation called upon him once more. In 1869, the hero of Appomattox was inaugurated as the 18th President of the United States. His mission was perhaps even more daunting than the war. Reconstruction. Defending the dream. As president, Grant became the fierce protector of the newly freed. He signed the Enforcement Acts to crush the early rise of the Ku Klux Klan and fought to ensure that the 15th Amendment, granting African American men the right to vote, was more than just ink on paper. The twilight of a legend, the savior of the Republic. Ulysses S. Grant passed into history not just as a conqueror, but as the man whose sheer persistence ensured that the United States remained a reality. He was the hammer that broke the rebellion and the hand that tried to pull a fractured people back together. Grant's story is one of ultimate redemption and grit. Should we venture further into the 20th century to discuss the strategic brilliance of Dwight D. Eisenhower? Or would you like to explore the civilian leadership of Abraham Lincoln during those same dark years? The gray morning of June 6, 1944. The Great Crusade. As a cold, relentless rain lashed the English Channel, General Dwight D. Eisenhower stood alone with a decision that would define the century. Millions of lives and the liberty of Western civilization hung in the balance. With a heavy breath and a simple, resolute, "Okay, let's go," he launched Operation Overlord. The storming of Normandy. As the supreme Allied commander in Europe, Eisenhower orchestrated the largest amphibious invasion in human history. He didn't just command ships and planes. He managed the egos of Churchill, de Gaulle, and Montgomery, weaving a fractured alliance into a singular, unstoppable spearhead aimed at the heart of Nazi tyranny. The radiant noon of 1945, the liberator of Europe. From the blood-stained sands of Omaha Beach to the ultimate collapse of the Third Reich, Eisenhower was the steady hand on the tiller. He saw the horrors of the concentration camps with his own eyes and ordered them documented, ensuring the world could never forget. The unifying force. He was the rare leader who understood that modern war was won not just by bullets, but by logistics, diplomacy, and the collective will of free peoples. By the time the guns fell silent in May 1945, Ike was no longer just a general. He was a global icon of liberation. The sunlit morning of 1953, leading the Golden Age. The warrior returned home, not to rest, but to lead a nation into a new era of prosperity. In 1853, he was inaugurated as the 34th President of the United States. His presidency was defined by the hidden hand, a calm, deceptive ease that masked a sophisticated geopolitical strategy during the frostiest years of the Cold War. Building modern America. Under his watch, the interstate highway system was born, physically binding the American continent together like never before. He steered the nation through the Korean War and took the first federal steps toward desegregation, proving that the man who defeated fascism abroad would not tolerate injustice at home. The Golden Twilight, the statesman of peace. Dwight D. Eisenhower left the Oval Office with a prophetic warning about the military-industrial complex, a final act of wisdom from a man who knew the cost of war better than anyone. He remains the definitive American leader of the mid-century, a general who hated war and a president who loved peace. Eisenhower transitioned the world from the chaos of total war to the structured tension of the atomic age. Would you like to delve into the lives of other 20th century titans like Franklin D. Roosevelt, or perhaps explore the civil rights era with John F. Kennedy. The bitter morning of 1942. A promise carved in steel. As the tropical sun beat down on the retreating dust of Corregidor, the American presence in the Philippines seemed extinguished by the Japanese onslaught. General Douglas MacArthur, forced to evacuate by presidential order, stood on the shores of Australia with a pipe in his hand and fire in his eyes. On that somber morning, he uttered the four most famous words in military history: "I shall return." It wasn't just a statement. It was a blood oath to a fallen people and a rallying cry for a nation in shock. The scorching noon of 1944 to 1945. The master of the island hop. While the world's eyes were often fixed on Europe, MacArthur was waging a different kind of war. A brutal, humid, and brilliant campaign across the vast reaches of the Pacific Theater. The return to glory. In October 1944, wading through the surf of Leyte Gulf, he fulfilled his vow. As the Supreme Allied Commander in the Southwest Pacific, he bypassed enemy strongpoints and struck where they were weakest, saving countless American lives through strategic genius. By the time he stood on the deck of the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay to accept the Japanese surrender in 1945, he had transformed from a general into the architect of a new Asia. The foggy dawn of 1950. The master stroke at Incheon Peace was short-lived. When the North Korean tanks rolled across the 38th parallel, the world turned once more to the old lion. Now leading the United Nations Command, MacArthur conceived a maneuver so daring that his peers called it madness: the Incheon landing. The Incheon miracle. Against impossible tides and fortified cliffs, MacArthur's forces struck behind enemy lines, shattering the North Korean army in a single, lightning blow. It was the crowning tactical achievement of a career that spanned half a century, proving that even in the twilight of his years, his mind was the sharpest weapon in the American arsenal. The stormy sunset of 1951, the soldier who never faded away. History remembers MacArthur as a man of contradictions, heroic, defiant, and at times larger than the government he served. His dismissal by President Truman in 1951 marked the end of an era, leading to his haunting farewell before Congress. Old soldiers never die, they just fade away. The eternal legacy. He rebuilt Japan from the ashes of war into a modern democracy and stood as the iron shield of the West in the East. He remains the definitive symbol of American military grandeur. MacArthur was the last of the great commanders who saw themselves as figures of destiny. Would you like to explore the story of his contemporary and rival, George S. Patton? Or perhaps shift to the naval side of the Pacific with Admiral Chester Nimitz? The dust-choked morning of 1942. The birth of the Desert Fox's nightmare. As the scorching sun rose over the sands of North Africa, a man with ivory-handled revolvers and a gaze like flint stepped onto the dunes. Major General George S. Patton didn't just arrive. He exploded onto the scene. Following the stinging American defeat at Kasserine Pass, Patton took a broken, demoralized force and forged it into a lethal instrument of war. The discipline of steel. He demanded perfection, from the shine on a soldier's boots to the speed of a tank's engine. He knew that in the desert, speed was life. By the time he led the 7th Army in the invasion of Sicily, the world realized that a new master of mobile warfare had been born. The stormy noon of 1944, the race across France. While the world focused on the hedgerows of Normandy, Patton was chomping at the bit. When finally unleashed with his beloved Third Army, he conducted a blitzkrieg in reverse that left the German high command in a state of panicked paralysis. The master of velocity, Patton didn't believe in digging in. He believed in the relentless, violent application of pressure. His tanks bypassed strong points and raced across the French countryside with a velocity that defied traditional military logic. He was the master of lightning attack, proving that the tank was not just a shield, but a spear. The frozen morning of December 1644, the miracle at the Bulge. Perhaps his finest hour came during the darkest winter of the war, when the German Ardennes offensive trapped thousands of Americans at Bastogne. The Allied commanders were desperate. In a feat of logistical and tactical genius that remains studied in every war college today, Patton pivoted an entire army in the middle of a blizzard. The impossible relief. In just 3 days, he moved 250,000 men and thousands of vehicles across icy roads to strike the German flank. It was a maneuver that saved the Allied line and broke the back of the Nazi war machine. His soldiers, though exhausted, followed him because they knew old blood and guts would never ask them to go where he wouldn't lead. The sunset of a warrior, a legend written in lead. George S. Patton was a man out of time, a 19th century cavalier leading 20th century steel. He was crude, brilliant, controversial, and utterly indispensable. He didn't just fight for territory. He fought for the very soul of the American warrior spirit. The eternal legacy. He remains the gold standard for aggressive leadership. To his men, he was a profanity-laced force of nature. To his enemies, he was the only American general they truly feared. Patton was the lightning bolt that struck when the Union needed it most. We have journeyed from the Revolution to the mechanical heart of World War II. Would you like to explore the naval brilliance of Admiral Chester Nimitz? Or perhaps pivot to the political giants like Franklin D. Roosevelt, who directed these titans from the White House?